Hello and welcome to the Big H podcast. My name is Mike Heise, and my guest tonight is Sarah Blodgett Bermeo. She is a political economist and associate professor of public policy and political science in the Sanford School at Duke University and director of graduate studies in the Master of International Development Policy program. Sarah, it is great to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Mike.
Did you hear that clap? There's clapping on my end, Sarah, because you're in front of a large studio audience, and so let's get ready to go. But it is great to have you. And as I said, your maiden name is Blodgett. You grew up in Hilton and graduated in, I believe it was 1997 or 93. I think 93, right?
1993 from Hilton.
Okay.
Yeah, though we don't have to bring that up, right?
Okay. Well, people won't try to figure
out
your
old.
age. No, it makes you experienced and a seasoned veteran. We'll put it that way.
Excellent.
Let's start off a little bit about your biographical information about, where you were born, your mom and dad, and your siblings.
Okay, yeah, I was born and raised in Hilton, New York. When I was about maybe around 13 years old, my family moved to what is now Blodgett Family Farm. It was not called that at the time, but it is now. My parents are Ruth and Dave Blodgett, who both also graduated from Hilton Central High School, though a little long before I did. And I'm the oldest of 6 kids, all of them raised in the area, many of them still living in the Rochester area, some of them, in Hilton, Spencerport area. And then I have a brother who's over in Fairport, and I have another brother who is out in Dallas. So he and I are the two that are not local.
What was it like growing up in a large family? I mean, I grew up with 5 kids. I thought that was a big family. 6, that's a little bit bigger. What was that like?
Yeah, I guess with any size family, there's pros and cons, right? You were never bored. There was always stuff going on, lots of noise, lots of activity. We all played sports that actually made it, both very busy, but also, very fun, like both playing sports myself, but also going to watch my siblings as the oldest. And then as I got older, driving them to a lot of their sporting events. I'm sure you did the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Drive your younger siblings to their sporting events because the parents can only do so much. And so that was fun. I do think that sports became like a really big bonding experience for all of us. But there's challenges. It's just there's a lot of you. There's this not much downtime. But I think the pros definitely outweigh that. And lots of fun things going on.
And what did your mother and father do for occupations?
Yeah, as I was growing up, so my father was a manager of a supermarket. He's retired now, but that was what he did. And then once we moved to the farm, he did that while also running the farm, or co-running the farm with my mother. And my mother, when we were little, she was home with us most of the time. She was like a Tupperware salesperson, for a little while when I was younger. But she stayed home with us for a while. And then when we moved to the farm, she, helped run that. And then, I think like so many other families, one income became more challenging to live on. And so she went back to work. She worked as a waitress for a long time. She worked in a bridal shop. She had a bunch of different jobs in retail and food service, try to bring in some extra money and feed us 6 kids.
She said a lot of really, really nice things about you. When I interviewed her, she talked about you being always wanting to help, fix things. You're tremendous at follow through. She also called yourself an atypical farm kid. And she said you were old before your time and you were always motivated. Now, that's your mom's perspective. What did you think? Did mom hit it pretty well?
I don't know. I mean, I do think, I don't know which order you came in, Mike, and the kids in the family. You said you were one of five. I know you had at least one younger brother because I was in
Yeah.
school with him.
Mhm.
So, I don't know. But, so I think as one of the older kids in a family, you do. I think there's no doubt that you mature a little faster if you're one of the older kids in a large family, right? You just kind of have to
Mhm.
more responsibility. You're watching your siblings sometimes. You're driving them places. You just, so I think that part is true. But otherwise, I don't know. She was probably just being a mom too, and um, bragging a little bit about her kid. I mean, I will say my parents definitely brought us up to work hard to get things if we wanted them. So I did get that from them, and I think not just myself, but my siblings as well have really that's showed up in our careers and in our ability to kind of go after things that people might not have thought were within our reach, when we were growing up. And our parents always encouraged us, if you really want something, just go out there after it. But they also told us you have to work hard for it. Nobody's going to give it to you. And so I think there's some of that definitely resonated and stuck with me as I got older.
Yeah, and getting to know your parents, they are also very humble people. Um, they're people that I don't really find out very much around anymore, that they really listen and internalize what you're saying and ask questions. And it's been a tremendous amount. We talked off air about getting to know them, and it's really improved my life getting to know your family. Now let's swing a little bit into what's a day in the life of Sarah Bermeo there at Duke University. Let's say you're on campus. What's a day in the life for you on campus?
Yeah. I mean, so there are two times of year at Duke: basketball season and not basketball season, right? So it kind of
Right.
depends on whether it's basketball season or not.
Hmm.
So if we just take a typical like non-basketball season day, right? There's a lot of variety in a college professor's life, and I think people, maybe people don't necessarily realize that. I certainly didn't when I was a college student. I was like, what do these people have, like this really easy job? They show up twice or three times a week, they teach us, and then they leave. And so I was like, well, that's a cushy job. I'd like that one. I got to tell you, it's actually not like that at all. um, I do teach, I teach, and I teach students at all different levels, so undergraduate, master's level students, and PhD level students, and they're all great, and they all bring different perspectives and different strengths and you know outlooks to the table. So that's very cool. So a typical day would have some teaching in it, a lot of grading, a lot of papers to grade. Office hours, people stopping by office hours. But then, research, and I do a lot of, not every person who works at university is what I would call a publicly engaged scholar. But I do try to be. And so I'm out there a lot. You know, seems similar to the type of things that you're trying to do, trying to reach a lot, trying to reach people, right? Trying to, if you have something to say, looking for different outlets, places to say it. And so I do write for, I used to write more for Brookings Institution. I honestly just have not had as much time, lately to do that. Recording podcasts, putting on events, trying to be convener, bring people together. A lot of my research has been focusing on migration from Central America and climate change, and how that's really been part of the thing that's been driving the rise in migration from Central America that we've seen. And so that's a topic that there's been a lot of interest in, and so that actually then kind of spurs me to be doing a lot of invited talks, and just trying to go out there and talk to people and tell them what we're seeing in our research, rather than just kind of sitting behind a desk and doing the research. So that's it keeps it really interesting, and working on research topics. If they're topics that you're interested in, it just kind of keeps you motivated and keeps you going all the time. And in particular, working on the projects I'm working on related to Central America right now, you just see how much need people have out there. And I think it does, to go back to some of your earlier questions, I think it resonates with me because I grew up on a farm, and I see so many of these like smallholder farmers in Central America really being hit by changes in rainfall patterns. And well, I certainly can't understand what they're going through, right? Because they're going through a level of, food scarcity and difficulty that I never had to experience. I can still, at least at the very basic level, understand what it means for a year when the rains don't come the way they're supposed to come, right? That's going to have an impact. And so that's what I do. That's what I spend my time on, working with students and doing my research and engaging with people who are interested or want to learn more about these topics.
So do you do a lot of traveling then in your job?
Um, I do a fair amount of traveling, but I also partner with a lot of people in the countries where I'm working because it's actually really important to be getting the local perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
experts on the ground. One of my partner groups is that I've been working with in Central America is Catholic Relief Services, which has a global footprint to it. But they are very involved in Central America and in projects to try to improve the lives of people down there. And it's been really neat to partner with people who are, and they're technical experts, like they're actually, soil scientists who go out there and think about how it would be, how do you help farmers improve the soil quality so that they can grow, better crops or maybe even different crops than what they're growing, because with rainfall and temperature and soil quality changing, you can't keep just growing the same things that you've been doing. And then I come along and I just have this kind of academic-y perspective, and I'm like, oh, well, let's study this and see if it actually has an impact then on the
Mm-hmm.
decisions that people make. And that's been really neat to be partnering with people who are really on the ground all the time, working to try to make people's lives better. And I wish I could claim that I was doing that. I'm, most of the time working at Duke or traveling around the United States talking about our findings. I've been to Central America before, but that's not where I spend most of my time. I get most of my insights there from talking with people on the ground. And then I'm more on the analytical side of things. Okay, if you provide me with the data from what you're seeing, then we can try to analyze it and give a perspective that the people who are out there every day trying to figure out the farming situation don't have time to sit back and analyze the data, right? And look at some graphs and try to figure out what's going on. And people sitting at universities do have that time. That's part of what we do. And so trying to make those partnerships to really, hopefully make a little bit of a difference.
In one of your podcasts, a thing that resonated with me is just a simple thing that you were talking about, migration or immigration. I apologize if I use the terms incorrectly, but you talked about people don't want to move. Like they do want to stay where they are. Talk to us a little bit about how that's changed throughout the years of your research or your time in the field.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me when I first started looking at migration from Central America, and I first started as a researcher really looking at it in around 2018, 2019. And part of that was because the region was being hit by a drought, and it had been hit by a drought in 2014, 2015 time as well. And something that it didn't make a lot of news here. But in that 2014, 2015 period, they were really close to declaring a famine in Central America. So like the UN agencies that, decide when a famine is happening, were really like, they were one step away. There's kind of like this phase classification system that they use, like you would use for hurricanes or something like that. Right. And the worst one is famine. And they were just one rung away from declaring famine in Central America. And the only thing that stopped that was outside aid, was the fact that they were getting food aid from other places. And that really, I remember in 2014, 2015, when that was happening, thinking to myself, wow, that's a big change. That's not something we usually see in the Americas. Like, sure, we know that there's poverty, but an actual famine in the Americas, like that would be quite unusual. And so then when 2018, 2019 hit and the same conditions were developing on the ground again, I really started to become, is this going to be an ongoing phenomenon that we're going to see? And then, of course, this was starting to coincide with when we were seeing these huge increases of people coming into the United States particularly from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala in Central America, and coming up to, to the southern U.S. border. And there's a narrative about migration that I think a lot of it was true, actually, up until about the 2018 period, where a lot of the people coming from Central or South America to the United States would, would come as single adults. And they would, maybe they won the visa lottery, or some people would come up to the border, maybe claim asylum, or they'd be sponsored by employers to come, particularly in agricultural settings, and help work on farms. But it was usually single adults who were coming, and and then they would save up money, and they would either go back home, like they would come for the farming season and go back home, or they would be here permanently, saving up money, sending some money back home, and maybe eventually saving up to bring their families over. And then 2018, 2019, that all changed. And we saw families with children coming to the U.S. southern border. And I'm sure lots of people remember the images of that. One of the reasons that the U.S. border system was unable to deal with that is because they just weren't equipped. That's not the type of migrants who usually came to the United States across the U.S. southern border. So to have all of these families showing up with children, I describe it to people, when I don't have slides or something to show, it would look like a COVID curve. Like it was kind of like we had these low levels, and then all of a sudden 2018, 2019 hit, and these just huge spikes in the number of people, and particularly of families with children coming across the U.S. border. And I was really, as a researcher, I was really, interested in why we were seeing this shift. And of course, as a human being, I was interested in why people really felt that they had to bring their children, and keeping in mind that this is a terrible journey to make. Right. If you're coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras, you're crossing all of Mexico. You are probably being, having people who are trying to extort you. You're subject to being attacked, to being robbed, to being turned back, to walking all of that way and being turned back. The conditions are terrible, and people are walking, right? People are walking that very, very long distance with their children. The conditions are terrible. Sometimes they're really rainy and awful. Sometimes they're really hot. Nobody does this out of choice. Like this is not like some vacation. You're actually risking your life and your children's lives, and definitely, your welfare and your safety to make this journey. And to be doing that with children, I was like, what is really going on here? And even, as U.S. border policies were becoming tougher and tougher on families and on children, that we still just saw people coming. And then you start to look into where they were coming from. And that was the other shift. All of a sudden, people were really coming from rural areas in a way that they hadn't been before. And when you looked at the data behind it, some of these areas we'll take Guatemala, for instance, in what they call the highlands, so like up in the mountainous, hilly areas, indigenous communities who have lived there for hundreds of years were already really poor, right? They were already, in some villages, you already had 70% of children before all of the migration started increasing. 70% of children under the age of 5 who were stunted, who weren't the right height and weight for their age, and they weren't migrating. They started migrating when the crops started failing, because these were subsistence farmers, and if the crops don't grow, they don't have any food. And to kind of this is a little nerdy. I mean, everything I've probably said up till now is nerdy because I'm a college professor, and the things we think are cool are nerdy by definition. But one of the things that we're really seeing as we study this is there's this period in the middle of the summer, just July, August period. And so I mentioned I grew up in a farm in Western New York. We basically have one growing season, right? We have summer, and you plant in the spring, and things grow in the summer, and you harvest some of it in the summer, and you harvest some of it in the fall. But it's just kind of one long season. In Central America, as in many places, actually, they have 2 seasons. So they have a harvest, and then they clear the land, and then they have another and then they plant again, and they have another growing season. If the droughts are too difficult in July and August, it wipes out the harvest from the first season and the planting for the second season. So they basically lose 2 crops in a row. And the estimates that were coming out of international organizations that were down there monitoring the situation, saying farmers were losing 70 to 80% of their crop for multiple seasons in a row. And there's just no way you can survive on that. And so that was why we were really seeing these big increases, not just in the total number of migrants, but also in the people, coming with children from these areas.
Approximately how long would it take for these migrants to come from Central America and make it to the southern border?
That's, it's a good question, and there's a lot of variation in that. It partly, so some people it takes a lot of time because they make it part of the way and they get turned back, and then they make it another part of the way and they get turned back. Others, are able to, get a ride on a bus or on a truck or something like that, and so make it part of the way.
Hmm.
Um, Walking, it's going to take weeks, right, if not months, to make that trip on foot, and it's going to again vary based on the time of year, how bad the conditions are, how rainy it is. So there's not one, how small the children are that you're traveling with, right? If you're traveling with small children, you're not going to walk that far in a day.
Right, right.
Or maybe like the slightly bigger children, like the really small ones, I guess you carry. But if you're traveling with kids that are, a little bit older, but walking, they can't walk as far as a grown up
Hmm.
can during the day. So it's going to take a long time. It's a long journey, and it's a dangerous journey.
You were talking about in 2018, 2019, a lot of things changed and you saw a dramatic increase. And I think the U.S. Border Patrol, I might be using the wrong organizational name, they weren't prepared for it. Was there something that we in the United States could have done in order to foresee that coming and be better prepared for what had happened?
At the time, I mean, I don't necessarily think so, but I
Hmm.
think it's changed. Like, I think it's becoming the new normal because climate change is really going to keep affecting these areas.
Hmm.
And so I think we should come up with ways. I mean, as a researcher, I try not to tell people what they should do because,
Hmm.
like, I'm not an elected official, and so I leave it to elected officials to really make the decisions because presumably we elect them, and
Hmm.
we're a democracy, and then we want them to make decisions on our behalf. But I would say that it could definitely be in our interest to be watching, as a country, to be watching these patterns and thinking about how, what does an effective system look like for processing people coming to the border, when there's a lot of children, who are coming as well, because our detention facilities are not set up like that. And saying that we want to have a more humane border policy is not the same thing as saying we just want to have wide open borders.
Hmm.
It seems to be clearly true that the infrastructure that we have at the border was built for a different time and a different type of migration, and to treat people with dignity, but also to serve our own interest. It would make sense to be updating some of the ways that we're interacting with people as they come up to the U.S. border.
Well, later on in the podcast, I'll ask you some of your, like, if you had a chance to talk with the big wigs of policy making and what you would actually tell them. Um, I want to circle back a little bit to when you were growing up, that the elementary education. Your mother told me you attended St. Lawrence School. Tell me a little
I
bit about
did,
that.
yes. Yeah. So I assume St. Lawrence is still there, right? Are
Hmm. Yes.
they are still there. And so at the time that I was there, I know there's been some reorganization of schools, but at the time that I was there, it was K through 8. Actually, it was not, didn't have a kindergarten when I was in kindergarten, but it had one by the time I left 8th grade. So it's K through 8 school, small, right? So there were like 30 to 35 kids per grade. So by the time you graduated, you knew everybody in your grade, and you'd been with them for a very long time for the most part. A few new people came in, but a lot of people stayed. Very good education. Like, I have no idea what it is like now. It's been a long time since I've been there, but I actually trace a lot of, you know, how well I did later on in high school, and then in college too. Like, it was a really good education. We came out of there. I didn't realize it until I left there and went to Hilton High School that they had prepared me better than, the average person is prepared. And I think it's probably the smaller size of the school and the ability of the teachers to kind of get to know the students really well. In middle school at the time, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, we switched classes, right? So we would have like one of the teachers for English and one of the teachers for social studies and one of the teachers for math. But then by the time you got to eighth grade, you'd been having that same group of three teachers for 3 years in a row. So they kind of really knew the students, and they demanded a lot out of us, I think. I mean, I got a lot of homework, way more than my kids get these days. It was good. I mean, it was good for me. The other thing that I've learned, one of the things you learn as an adult, seeing things from the other side, is just because it was good for me doesn't mean it was necessarily good for everybody. Like I look now and I'm like, ooh, some kids might not have really thrived in that environment with so much homework all the time, but it was a good education, and it did prepare us well. So I've always been grateful for that.
Your mom echoed the same thing about your education at St. Lawrence. Yeah, she also brought up a story. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it was once said that if the principal was not at school, it was okay because Sarah Blodgett was there. She'd take care of everybody.
I don't know if that's true, or if that's a mother's anecdote, or if it's a teacher telling a mother something they think the mother would want to hear. Yeah. Gosh, I kind of hope I wasn't that bossy, but maybe I was. I don't know.
I think it was just that you were organized and you had the thought of the entire school in mind.
Sure, we'll go with that.
We'll go with that. So then you transition over to Hilton High School. Talk a little bit about going from that class group of 30 to 35, and then you move into the high school.
Yeah, I mean, I think in retrospect, it was good, right? I think there was probably some, transition shock. I didn't know, most of the people at Hilton High when I was a freshman had gone to Hilton Public Schools before Hilton High, so they knew each other. Mm-hmm. I've never been great in those new situations where everybody knows each other and you kind of don't. You're the odd person out. Though I will never forget, it had to be one of my first weeks of PE class, gym class, we called it then. I think they say PE now, but one of my first weeks of class, that dreaded moment when everybody is picking people for teams, right? And it was a freshman, sophomore PE class that was combined. And I was just like, I wanted to sink into the floor because nobody knew me. I wasn't a particularly fashionable or cool kid, even by nature. And so that's probably I grew up to be a college professor, so that's probably self-evident. But, I was like, just kind of standing there like, oh, I hope I don't get picked last. And I didn't get picked last because there was a girl, an extremely popular sophomore, who'd been in a dance class with me like years before. She was one of the captains picking people, and I was one of the first people she picked. We weren't good friends or anything. She just knew I was the new kid. And those are the type of things that stick with you. Like, I doubt she remembers it at all. Like, for her, it was just a passing thing. But those are kind of things that really stick with you. So it was definitely culture shock going there. But there were opportunities because it was a bigger school that just don't exist at a smaller school. So I was able to join the tennis team, right? Like we didn't have a tennis team at my middle school. We had 35 people per grade. And we didn't have tennis courts. So that was super cool. Like I was able to join the tennis team and, make friends that way. I did Model UN. Like I said, I was definitely on the nerdy side. I loved it. Nothing against Model UN. But it was this kind of weird dichotomy where I was like doing sports, but also doing Model UN, which was actually not unusual at Hilton, at least in my year. There were a bunch of us who did like kind of combined athletic things with nerdy things. And I actually really liked the fact that there were a bunch of the people who, were doing well in classes were also on sports teams. Like, it wasn't looked down upon to be, doing, to be to care about being in, the advanced math classes or English classes. Not that they're right for everybody, but in some environments, you would really be almost ridiculed for that. And I actually felt that it was from that perspective, a pretty accepting type of, there's a lot of fluidity of people going across what would be considered the normal groups, right? Like you could be in one group, but also be in another group and kind of move between those, which I thought was actually, pretty cool. I'd say, compared to St. Lawrence, the academics weren't as rigorous. But the, there were other opportunities that were there because it was a bigger public school that I wouldn't have had if I'd stayed at a smaller school.
Now, I think you're selling yourself short with the UN. Didn't you end up heading up the UN at some point?
I think, wow, that's a long time ago now. I do think that by my senior year, I was, yes, but I mean, I don't know if it was just like the default. Maybe there were only a couple of us. Like, I honestly don't remember the details. My mother probably remembers the details.
Yeah,
I don't remember
she pretty
the details.
much does.
I remember having lots of fun.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I remember it was tons of fun, and you got to meet people from tons of different schools. And Hilton, actually, the high school, put on one of the biggest conferences around for Model UN. And so I don't know if they still do it, but they did. I don't even know if Model UN still exists. But they did then. And we had people coming from all over the place to Hilton for this weekend conference. And that was super cool. Like you just got to meet tons of different people and talk about the types of issues that you might not talk about so much in your regular classes. So that was great. I really enjoyed the experience.
You talk about getting involved in tennis, and I also, little birdie told me, since you were so motivated that you actually went out and took lessons and paid for your own. Is that true?
I did, yes. I partially paid for my own. If I remember this, I think I do remember the details for. So at the time, so tennis, and one of my kids plays tennis. Tennis was very different back then. There weren't a lot of publicly available lessons out there, right? And like now, I don't know, but I would imagine that maybe there's some group that goes down to a town hall in Hilton and offers lessons or something like that. Those town hall tennis courts did not exist when I started playing tennis. Do they exist now?
Yes,
there are still tennis
sure
courts
do.
at the town hall in Hilton.
6 or 8.
Okay.
Yeah, there's like 6 or 8.
Okay. Right. So those type of opportunities, weren't there. And so if you wanted to learn to play tennis, you basically had to be able to afford lessons at a club. We couldn't really, but my parents and I had, but I was a little bit older too when I started playing tennis. I didn't start as a young kid. I was probably like 12, 13. It was before I got to high school because I'd already taken some lessons by then. So we had a thing. I was babysitting a lot. I was making a bunch of money, and they paid like every other week, right? They paid him and I paid. So like it was this system that worked out. And I probably valued it more because I was paying for it too, right? Like I think that was probably true. But I just loved it. I mean, I still love tennis. I still love watching it. Occasionally playing it, though not that much anymore. I'm getting old. But yeah, I mean, it's still one of my favorite sports. So it doesn't surprise me that I was like, it's easy to be motivated about stuff you love, right? You pick up something and you really, really like it, and you're like, oh, let's keep doing this.
Good lifelong sport. You also talked about
it is a good lifelong sport.
Yeah, and you said you did some babysitting. Any other jobs you did while you were in high school?
Yeah, I was a cashier for a little bit. We talked about this a little bit off air. I was a cashier at the Big M back when it was the Big M before it's Tops now, right? It is still a
Correct.
Tops market there in the village. Yeah. So it was before that. I was cashier at the Big M, and then I was a waitress at the Friendly's restaurant in the mall. Which is probably, I'm assuming, not still there. The Grease Ridge Mall. I know, Grease Ridge is still there, but I'm assuming there's not still a Friendly's there. But I was a waitress there for quite some time because I kept doing that when I went to college too. So that was part of the way that I paid my way through college. Let's see, what else did I do? I mean, that was probably it in high school. In college, then I had some other odd jobs, but those were my main ones then.
Now, so you're in high school. What made you gravitate towards, let's say, the U of R? I want to point out to our audience, you were valedictorian in 1993, so you were excelling in your grades. Um, what did you start to develop an interest in and say, you know what, I think I might want to pursue this in college?
I didn't. It was complete fortuitous. Like there are things that you look back on in your life and you're like, if this one day hadn't happened, maybe my whole life was different.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those stories. I was first generation. We did not understand about college applications or about financial aid or about scholarships. Like I didn't know any of that. And honestly, guidance counselors weren't as up to date on that type of stuff back then as I'm sure they are now too. And so pretty much everyone that went to college from my graduating class went to state schools or community college, or quite honestly, like we didn't have the rates of people going to college that Hilton does now. So I mean, it was not a huge. I mean, you must remember, right? It was not a huge percentage of the class that was going off, particularly to 4-year colleges. And so I had won something that I didn't really know what it was. I won something called the Xerox Award, and my junior year of high school. And the Xerox Award was, I still don't to this day understand it. It was for the student who did best in history. Why Xerox had an award for people who did well in history is something I have never quite understood, but they did. And it was for, and then they gave this to like tons of high schools. It was not a Hilton high school thing. They gave it to tons of high schools. I had a roommate when I was in college who was from Puerto Rico who had won the Xerox Award. So they were giving this out, but it was specifically for study at the University of Rochester because of Xerox ties to the area. And it was a $5,000 a year scholarship. Anybody who's priced out private colleges knows that that's not a huge chunk of it, but it's something. But I thought to myself, but I can't afford the rest of the tuition there, so I'm not going to apply there. And then the University of Rochester at the time had this program. I don't know if they still have it. They were sending someone out from their admissions office to all of the area high schools for a day. And the person, I don't remember his name. He was very nice. But the person who came from the University of Rochester sat in the Hilton High School guidance office. I may have been the only person all day who stopped by to see him. He looked really bored. And I said to him, I was like, I probably am not going to apply because I don't think that I could afford it. But if I did apply, do you think I would, what are my chances of getting in? And so he asked me some questions about my grades and my SAT scores. And he was like, oh, well, you would get in. And I was like, no, what do you think my chances are? And he's like, no, you would get in. And I was like, really? And I'm sure they would never say it that definitively now, but I had good SAT scores and I was valedictorian of the class and I had good grades and I'd taken AP classes, but, I said, but I told him, I said, but I couldn't afford to go. And that's when he explained to me about scholarships and financial aid and said, you really should apply. And so I did. And I did get other scholarships and financial aid. I paid a lot out of pocket and I graduated with student loan debt. But it was that guy coming out from the University of Rochester and sitting there for the day at Hilton High School and maybe talking to one or two students that actually, I probably would not have applied to the U of R. I would have applied to state schools and I would have gotten a good education. But I don't think there's any denying that when if you change the university you went to, that it could have a very, different, you could have a different trajectory afterwards. And so that really did, set me on the trajectory that landed me where I am now.
Was that the only school that you did apply to?
I applied there and Geneseo, SUNY Geneseo. I think those were the only two. If I'm being quite honest, application fees were expensive and we didn't have a lot of money. And so I was like, I'm only going to apply to a couple places because I don't want to spend the money applying to a whole bunch. And I assumed actually, because I still didn't quite believe that I would get scholarships to the University of Rochester. I assumed I would be going to Geneseo, and I was happy with that. I thought
Hmm.
that would be a great place to go too. But then when I got into Rochester, I ultimately chose that one.
So you mentioned that, or I did, and you were valedictorian. Do you remember anything about your speech?
Wait, is this a trick question? Did my mother
It's
say something
no,
about my
it's
speech?
this is all Mom said. She said it was a very good speech, but that's it. It's not like I got a hidden camera that I'm going to show people. But do you remember what you
I know.
said to
I
your
was like, right,
class?
this is your life type of
No.
type of
Do you
thing.
remember what your main message was? I mean, was it to go out in the world and be somebody, or what? I
I
don't
mean, isn't
remember
that what
anything.
everybody's main message is when they do high school speeches? Like,
Well, get
what
it
are you gonna say? Like, I'm so sad. You can't, like, you have to be inspirational.
right.
I do remember that I wrote a poem,
Hmm.
but I don't remember the poem.
You don't remember
So
because well, that's unique. I mean, but I don't know the poem, but maybe I can have your mother look it up. But um,
oh
so
gosh, I forgot about that. She might.
all right. So then you ended up going to the U of R. Did you live on campus there?
I did, yes.
Okay. And then what type of classes did you take? Like, what was life on campus there?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously very different because I mean, if I think that's true for anybody going from high school to college. But again, I was the oldest, so I hadn't had like older siblings go to college that I might have visited.
Hmm.
So that was very different. I was still working. I was working a lot because I was trying to pay, to not have too much student loan debt and to pay for some of it as I went. So I was definitely, still spending time. I was still waitressing at Friendly's, and then I was also waitressing at the Ground Round. I don't know if
Oh
people
yeah.
know what the Ground Round or Friendly's are, but
Hmm.
they were chain restaurants. So doing a lot of hours doing that. So I wasn't on campus as much as some people might be
Hmm.
because of that. And I had good friends. I made great friends in my jobs off campus. Like I
Hmm.
that was a lot of my friend network. But the classes were good. Some were great, some were boring. I started college as a double major in history and Spanish, and I ended college as a double major in economics and political science. So, like that, when they say everybody always changes their major, I was definitely living proof of that.
Hmm.
So see, my mother thinks I always knew what I wanted to do, but it's not true. See, I changed my major. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But part of that was just, exploring new topics. Like you don't really take a lot of classes in political science or economics when you're in high school. Maybe you take one or something. So, taking new classes and just seeing whole new fields of study that I hadn't thought about before and saying, oh, those are kind of interesting. I'd like to learn more about those. And that was, there was no like really profound reason for why I chose my majors. It was just that they interested me, which I think is actually really good advice for people. Like
Hmm.
if you're bored with something or you're not interested in it, you're not going to do well at it for the most part. At least if it's something, I mean, we all have to do some things that we don't like, but
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to dedicate 4 years or 6 years or something to studying something that you hate, right? So you might as well find something that you like if you're going to be putting that much time into it.
And you kind of implied this, but let's say we have a high school senior watching this podcast, which I hope they do. What advice would you give them if they're pursuing a college and they think they need to figure out what they're going to do in life at 18 years old of age? What would you tell them?
Yeah. There are very few people. I'm not sure if I've ever known anybody who at 18 years old actually knew what they wanted to do in life. Some people
Hmm.
think they might know, and some people act like they know.
Hmm.
But that's not the same thing as actually knowing. Um, and I think, I mean, part of my advice would be don't try to know at 18 exactly what you
Hmm.
want to do, because you might close off avenues that turn out to be the perfect avenue for you.
Hmm.
And, you know, I would also I would cast the net broadly and don't let, I say, especially true nowadays. There is a 4-year college education is a great thing and a great investment for a lot of people, and it's not for everyone. And I love to tell people this story. Like I wish I made as much money as my plumber, and I'm actually not joking. right? Like the guy who came to when my like washing machine was like flooding my house one day or something, and I'm just chit chatting with him, and he gets a call, and the call is from his wife, and he says, "Oh yeah, my wife's she was at home with the kids. She didn't work," and I only say that to note this is like a single income type of situation. And so he was the sole breadwinner for his family, and she was calling because there was something wrong with their like weekly cleaning people who came in to clean the house. And I was like, man, I should have been a plumber. Like, you can survive on one salary and have weekly cleaning people. But he had successfully, I'm sure he didn't always have that, but he had started out somewhere, and then he had started his own business, and he was, he had a thriving business. And my guess is he probably didn't go to a 4-year school. He probably went to a trade school or just learned it, on the job. And there's a ton of good careers and jobs out there. And many of them that some people might kind of think about as like, oh, I don't know if people make a good living in that. If you start really inquiring and looking at some of these jobs, people are making a really good living, and enjoying what they do, and sometimes being their own boss. So, I took a certain path, and I'm very happy with the path that I don't actually want to switch places with my plumber. I don't think I'd be a good plumber. But there's like, there's tons of interesting and good things to do out there. And if you've pigeonholed yourself at the age of 18, you might not find the right one for you.
I think that's great advice. I really do. Now, in terms of your path, you end up graduating from U of R, and then you take your talents to Princeton. Talk a little bit about your choice to attend Princeton and what drew you there.
Yeah. Again, I think, and it always sounds so much more planned out in retrospect than it actually is at the time. I worked in New York City for a few years after I graduated from the U of R. Very typical first, post college job. Consulting firms and other places kind of come to campus. They batch interview people. If they like you, then they invite you in for an interview. And so I was just working for a consulting firm in New York City. Nothing, I mean, it was a good job. It paid decent money. But it was, not crazy interesting. Not for me, at least. And I was interested in public policy, though I'm not sure if at the age of 21, 22, 23, I actually knew what that even meant. But I thought to myself, I work in a city and I'm making good money I'm interacting with big corporations, but I kind of want to help the little guy a little bit. I want to, maybe go into I didn't picture myself getting a PhD at all. I thought I just want to go into, maybe work in government or work for a nonprofit organization, or just, maybe not work for corporate America for all of my life. So I just applied to a few places and got a scholarship to Princeton for their program, which sounds maybe more impressive than it is. They actually give out a lot of scholarships for their graduate programs. So the hard part is getting in, but getting a scholarship really isn't like an extra thing on that. It's not like an MBA where you end up taking out or a medical degree or something where you take out huge amounts of debt. And while I was there, I was studying different aspects of poverty, both poverty in the United States, but also poverty internationally. And I just realized that people who had the types of jobs that I wanted had PhDs. And that was really, I actually did not want to spend more time in school, particularly. But I was looking at people who were working, especially in international development contexts, and a lot of people had PhDs. And I thought, well, if I really want to have a chance of being in that profession and kind of climbing to the top, I didn't particularly go in thinking I wanted to be a professor. I thought maybe I'd work for like the World Bank or an international NGO or something like that. But a lot of people had that higher credential, and so I decided to after my master's degree to continue on and do my PhD. And so I did the master's degree and then stayed for the PhD at Princeton. And that was it. But again, it wasn't it was not some grand scheme. It was each step I was kind of falling into the next step as I learned more about myself and what I wanted to do and what was kind of required, in order to do that successfully.
You're talking to a guy that's barely made it over Ridge Road, and here you are, U of R, Hilton, U of R. Then you said you lived in New York City. What was it like living in the city versus the roots that you had in Hilton?
One of the most eye-opening experiences in my life. Let's see, so maybe I've only had three. I think I've told you all three of them now. But one, one of them, when I was 18 years old and I went to New York City for the first time. So before I had a job there, just to visit, had some friends there, whatever. And I had growing up in like Hilton. Honestly, we didn't even go to the city of Rochester that often. I
Hmm.
mean, it was, I was really, fairly insulated. And I thought people in the city knew everything. I thought they must be just so smart and they just must know so much. And the eye-opening experience for me at the age of 18, when I got on a plane for the first time in my life and went to New York City, was when I started talking with people, realizing they knew as little about my life as I knew about theirs.
Hmm.
And that I think I, is worth people worth people knowing. I mean, I remember getting to Duke even. This is, beyond what you're asking about, but I remember getting to Duke and I was sitting around a table of people. And Duke actually has a pretty wide range of people. And being in the South, there's lots of different dynamics, than some of the ones I'd grown up with in Rochester. And, you know, uh, Sitting around with some people, and there was a discussion going on about hunting. Now, of course, a lot of people in North Carolina hunt, and then a lot of people in North Carolina don't hunt, which is probably similar to New York.
Hmm.
And I grew up on a farm, and my family hunted, and so I just grew up with that. And There were some people who were just really down on hunting. And we happened to be it was a dinner. I have no idea what the event was for, but it was this dinner and they were serving, steak or whatever you serve at nice dinners. And I said, well, I literally don't understand, like, why you would be down on hunting while you're eating a cow. Like, I
Hmm.
just don't, I don't understand that. And the person looked at me, and this is not a commentary on hunting or anything. It's a commentary on people not knowing how other people live. The person looked at me and said, "Oh, people hunt for food?" And I was just like, like, I was like, well, of course they do. Like, it's a relatively low cost form of meat and protein. Why would you want to take that away from people? So, well, you're sitting around eating expensive steaks. Now, I want to be very clear. Most people in North Carolina aren't like, this person was not from North Carolina. This person had come from somewhere else. And, you're at a big university like Duke. There's people from all over. But I was just in shock that somebody just didn't realize that it's not just sport, that people are actually hunting and eating the food. And I it's just so I yes, it was different for me going out and meeting other people, but it was really interesting for me to see how different I was for them. Because we tend to think of ourselves as, oh, we're the ones who don't know stuff, which is true. There's tons of stuff that I don't know. But other people don't know stuff either. Right. And it's really not until you like get out there and talk to people and kind of open up and that you really, you see, oh, wow, there's tons of different people out there and they have tons of different perceptions. And some of those perceptions are different than mine, but they're right because
Hmm.
they're things I haven't thought about before. And some of those are different than mine and they don't understand. Like, it's because they just don't have, full information. And so there've been a lot of those moments. I think the more you travel and the more you talk with people, the more you realize how little you know, but also like how little other people know too.
Interesting. When you're, what type of publications and articles have you done in your PhD career and all that? Just interested in that.
Yeah. I mean, the kind of the standard for the fields I'm in is to publish journal articles. So
Hmm.
like when we say journal articles, we mean like academic
Hmm.
publications that, come out on what they call peer reviewed presses.
Right.
that's kind of I'm sure like most people come across these because they hear about them in the medical context,
Mm-hmm.
right? So medical, new medical breakthroughs that get published in journals. Other disciplines like economics and political science have journals too. We just don't get cited nearly as much as like the medical ones because it's not, it's not quite as interesting as if we'd figured out a cure for cancer or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's, it's not as widely relevant, I guess, but those are some of the publications that I do. I did wrote a book, again, a very academic-y type of book, but I try to couple that with also writing for outlets, like the Brookings Institution or like newspapers or doing podcasts, doing policy briefs that might actually like get on the desks of people making decisions. Because if we do this research, but then it just sits in a desk and only gets read by other academics who read academic journals, then that's not really that satisfying. You want people to see what you're finding out, especially if it could help them make better policies or plan for things. I definitely try to do that type of public facing writing as well, both for policymakers, but also for the general public.
So when you came out of Princeton, did you already have a job, or like what was your job when you came out?
Yeah. So after I got my PhD, I already had lined up the job at Duke.
Okay.
Though I spent a year doing a postdoc at Yale first. So we weren't quite ready to move down to North Carolina yet. And so we stayed in the North for another year. But yes, I did have a job at Duke. I was very fortunate because academic jobs are actually really hard to get. And they became harder. I think it's become harder to get academic jobs, since I got one. And so I'm always very grateful that I seem to have timed it exactly right. Like I got the job at Duke in 2008. And, for people who might not remember, they like within like 6 months of when I'd taken the job at Duke, like the financial cliff had happened. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And everything, the collapse had happened and Wall Street was a mess and universities really weren't hiring for a while. And so I had just kind of perfectly timed it where, nothing, just complete luck. Again, there's so much of my story that comes down to being in the right place at the right time. And was, really fortunate to land this fantastic job at a great university. And also it's actually a really cool place. I mean, if people haven't been to Durham, North Carolina, I mean, maybe people are familiar with the Durham Bulls, but from the movie or pop culture references or something. But it's actually a really thriving place. And I would love some policymakers from New York or from the Rochester area to think about visiting places like Durham, because the revitalization that's happened here, of which I've had no part, I've just been able to observe some of it, as a resident, is fantastic. Being North Carolina, it was huge amounts of, so when you think about Rochester and you think about Kodak moving out or, moving out a lot of the jobs and Xerox and Bausch and Lomb and others, in North Carolina, it was tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
It was a huge tobacco producing region. And then it wasn't. I think just a couple of years, we've been in Durham for 15 years now, just a couple of years before we moved in, the last tobacco processing plants in this area had closed down. And the revitalization, the city, I think the university did play a role in this, but also the politicians played a huge role in this, attracting new businesses to the area, revitalizing. Okay. Like they took these old tobacco warehouses downtown and made them into loft apartments that were like super cool, that people wanted to live in, made them into like new businesses, hair salons and, small stores, just all kinds of, it's become this like big, foodie place that's been written up. The restaurants have been written up in this, they love to like kind of do Southern infusion cooking. So like infuse some native North Carolina things into like Asian cuisine or Mexican cuisine, or, pick whatever type of cuisine you want to put in there. And, award-winning chefs from the area. And this has all been in like the last 20 years or so, that they
Okay.
just were like, we can't rely on tobacco anymore. And we need to, to invest in other things. And the state is booming and the city is doing well. I think there can be some lessons there for other places. Though I'm not a city planner, so I'm sure it's much harder than what I'm making it sound like here. I've been very happy to have landed here, and I knew nothing about Durham, North Carolina before I took the job. It was just a good job, and we've actually been really really happy, and I've been really impressed with what I've seen since I've been here.
Now, you've been talking about we. So let's talk a little bit about your family and your husband and your children, if you want to tell our audience.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably a pretty typical family. We've been married for a while. We have 3 kids at various ages. I actually don't talk too much about my kids. Unlike my mother, apparently, I don't talk too much about my kids in public forums.
It's okay.
So, yeah, just out of respect for them,
Gotcha.
Because I don't want them hearing, oh, what did mom say about me? But I mean, we, just kind of generally, I mean, we go through a lot of the same things that other families do. Our kids are in public charter school.
Okay.
That's, we've had a good experience, and it's been a good place to raise kids. We've been very happy with that.
Excellent. All right. So let's, at Duke University, Climate Change, your book is called Targeted Development, Industrialized Country in a Globalizing World. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, book. I mean, there's, what's that?
I mean, it's hard. Like, I'm giving you a question about an entire book, and I don't know how you do a summary of it, but do your best.
I guess, what I would say is a lot of what I find in that book reflects some of the rhetoric that we hear from policymakers, I would say on both sides of the aisle, when they talk about international relations, that we really are in an interconnected world, and when things go poorly in one place, that can have spillover effects that can affect us. I used to get asked when President Trump was in office, he was not a big fan of foreign aid, and foreign aid has good things about it and bad things about it. He would try to cut the foreign aid budget, and because I talk about foreign aid in my book, people would say, well, do you think that they really will cut the budget? And I said, I'm actually not concerned that they will cut the budget, because if you actually look at the Senate, huge Republican support for foreign aid in the Senate, as well as Democratic support for it. And the reason that they will give, if you ask them, is helping other countries develop, especially strategically. And that was, one of the things I focused on in my book, helps us out. Because if people are doing, better where they are, if they're feeling more prosperous, there's going to be less conflict. There's going to be better trade between our country and their countries. There's going to be, less people feeling like they need to migrate because they can't stay where they are. And so, this kind of, I think in the public discourse about this, it's gotten kind of lost, and I think, the U.S., the House of Representatives, I think is a little bit of a different beast these days in terms of trying to figure out where the parties stand there. But at least in the Senate, there's still pretty strong support for this idea that, sometimes it's in our own country's self-interest to help other people out, and, to help other countries out. And that's a big part of what I was looking at is, how that's not just the U.S. that thinks that. So like if you look at the foreign aid policies or the trade policies of, say, the UK or Japan or Germany or others, there's very similar patterns. They're trying to build up development in countries where they're concerned that underdevelopment would have negative implications for themselves. And so that was really, a lot of what I was looking at in that book was how are different countries viewing this issue of underdevelopment, and how are they responding to it?
So moving forward, what do you see as the biggest challenges of climate change?
Yeah, I mean, there's two big buckets, right? There's one, there's the idea of mitigating climate change. So, trying to decrease the amount of greenhouse gases that we're emitting, so we can get to, so we can stabilize what's happening. I think one thing that's really important, and my guess is that a lot of people, will be able to point to some things in their life that are different in terms of climate than they were 10, 20 years ago. So I don't think it's novel to say that people are, already experiencing some of the effects of climate change, but all of the science is telling us that the areas that are going to experience this the worst are the ones, kind of closest to the equator, where some areas are just going to become so hot and so dry that they won't be really inhabitable, right? And so I think one of the key things to really understand is some of that's already happening. And at a much larger scale in these tropical areas than it is in, I think we're very fortunate in the United States. We're a pretty temperate area. Some places colder and some places warmer than others, but overall we're not in the extremes, right? We're not the Arctic and we're not the equator. But some people in some areas are really feeling these impacts now. And so taking that seriously and investing smartly when we think about investing in infrastructure, investing in tons. I mean, I love to see smart young people coming up who want to figure out battery storage, right? Like, how we get all of this energy from wind and from solar. How do we store? Like, we still haven't solved that problem. Like that's that's one of the big issues. We can generate energy, but how do we store it so that we can use it at a later time period? We're not good at that, right? Battery storage is bad. And so that leads to needing to generate electricity very close to the time when you need to use it, because we don't have good ways to store that energy. Those are the type of things that will help mitigate climate change, right? Those real innovations on the end of how we power our lives, because nobody wants to go back to not having electricity, right? That's not really the solution here. Nobody wants to go back to not driving cars or not being in airplanes. I mean, that's not what we want to do. And that's not really feasible. And that's not the way the world works. So how do we do those things in ways that are, have lower carbon footprints, but are also affordable? How do we make it affordable to have a lower carbon footprint? And understanding that there's countries out there that are growing and have lots of people entering the middle class for the first time, and they want cars and they want refrigerators and they want all of the things that we have, and that's going to put even more strain on the systems. And so how do we think about more sustainably doing that? And I also think there's huge opportunities for the countries that get this right, who become the leaders in manufacturing this stuff. Like, that's going to be hugely economically beneficial. Huge trade opportunities there for the countries that do this well. And, China's been investing in this type of technology. Nobody's doing it great yet. There's still huge room for improvement. But they've been strategically investing, I think, a lot more than the United States and other countries have. And we're gonna lose out on some of that trade and some of those economic opportunities if we don't do that. The other big challenge, though, is adaptation, because like I said, some places are already feeling this. I mean, even in the coastal US, what's going to happen to Miami? What's going to happen to the Outer Banks of North Carolina? What's going to happen to low-lying areas in New York City? We do need to think about adapting some of this, even if it takes a lot of time for greenhouse gases to not be having an impact. So even if we stopped emitting carbon tomorrow, the carbon that's already up there is going to be there for a while, and is going to, so there's we could invest in things that help to take carbon out of the atmosphere. But again, we're not doing that very well right now. So we have to adapt. We have to think about, strategically, well, where are the best places to build homes? Maybe it's not on a cliff overlooking the ocean that's going to, be subject to sea level rise. How are we going to think about, farming? How are we, as crop patterns change? That's going to happen in the U.S. It already is happening in the U.S. in some areas. So how are we going to think about that? And how are we going to think about our interactions with other countries? I think the U.S. is missing a huge opportunity in Central America. If the U.S. government and administrations, both, the Biden administration and the Trump administration before it, have said they want to reduce migration from Central America, but they're not spending much money, they're spending a lot of foreign aid money in the region, but most of it is not going to farmers. Very small percentage of it is going to farmers, but that's where the migration is coming from. So rethinking some of our policies and how we interact with other countries. Again, previous migration, it might have made a lot of sense to invest foreign aid in the cities and help people find jobs there, because that might have been where the migrants are coming from. But we haven't shifted our policies to think, well, okay, well, if most of the migrants are coming from agricultural areas, maybe we should, and they don't want to be coming, they've been, their families have been on these lands for hundreds of years. They want to stay there. But they can't, because they can't feed their kids. Like, is there a strategy that we could have? I mean, that's something I think you could get a lot of bipartisan support for. We're already sending foreign aid to the region. Why not reallocate it to farmers, right? There's a lot of support for helping farmers, actually, across the political aisle. So I think there's things we can do both domestically, in our own response to climate change and how that's going to affect the U.S., but also in our policies toward other countries. Again, I think not all of this stuff has to be political tug of wars. I think there's some areas where you could build fairly easily, like, strong bipartisan support, and people will just kind of get it. Like, people get it. If you say, oh, well, the reason that people are migrating is because they can't feed their kids, like, anybody who's got kids kind of understands that, right? And says, oh, well, are there things we could do to help them feed their kids, right? Like, that would be one solution to decrease migration. I do think, though, actually, and I do want to be really clear about this. I try to be clear whenever I'm talking about migration. I mean, the evidence of migrants being beneficial to the countries that they move to is actually really strong. The evidence that migration is actually over time a net economic benefit to the countries that receive migrants is really strong, and the U.S. is actually a perfect example of that. I mean, we've had generations on generations on generations of migrants coming to the United States, and our economy has grown and grown and grown and grown. And the percentage of the population migrating to the U.S., and like, if we think about the number of migrants coming into the U.S. now, the numbers are going up. But historically, in terms of the percentage of the population coming in, we've had other large waves of migration, and there's always been rhetoric. I mean, my own family is, part Irish. Man, if you look back at what they were saying in the 1860s about the Irish Catholics coming over, it is almost verbatim what people are saying about Central Americans or Latin Americans coming today. They're different, they're low skilled, they're whatever. I mean, so were my ancestors when we came, and eventually, you have access to good education, and you have access to good systems, and you become a contributing member, and you pay your taxes, and within one generation, pretty much every economic study I've seen shows that migrants become a net contributor to their society. So paying more into society than what they're taking out. And so that's important, I think, to note when we're talking about migration. But to the extent that there are people in Central America who don't want to leave their homes, who would prefer to stay where they are, and that obviously politically in the United States, we're not at a point where we want to say we want to take in huge numbers more people. I think there's a win-win here where we can help people who want to stay where they are, and decrease some of that pressure on the southern U.S. border, which the Democrats and Republicans have said they want to do. And that's, I think we can do that and do it relatively quickly if there was the political will to kind of pay attention to where people are coming from, why they're coming, and helping provide opportunities for them where they are.
You just make so much sense. And I've seen 2 or 3 podcasts I talked to you before our podcast that, your message comes through very clear, and you just really outlined it phenomenally, and I like it because to me, I pay attention to politics, and that just makes sense on both sides. Where, like you said, it's a win-win. Um, as we start to wrap up here, just some fun questions. I don't know if you could have dinner with anybody in history, one, two, or three people. Could be a family member, a historical person. Who would it be?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I have to give an answer quickly. I didn't get this question in advance. So I will tell one of my favorite historical figures ever is Harriet Tubman.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why, except that when I was a kid at St. Lawrence, we had a library. It wasn't a super huge library, but it was a decent library. And I just kept taking out a second grade, first grade, I don't know, whatever. This book about Harriet Tubman just fascinated me. And then when we moved to our farm, no one will ever convince me this isn't true. I'm pretty sure that my parents' farmhouse was on the Underground Railroad.
Mm-hmm.
There is actually historical evidence that the property itself was on the Underground Railroad. But inside the house, in this attic closet, there's a panel that like blends in perfectly with the ceiling, but pushes up, and it's an 1860s farmhouse, so the timing is right. That pushes up, and you could totally hide people in there. And so I've always been convinced that, that this was, there's this connection from like when I was this like little kid and had this fascination. But what fascinated me about Harriet Tubman was like, nobody, like, she didn't care if people told you couldn't do something, she just did it anyway. And if she saw people that she could help, she just helped them. It didn't like that. She didn't let things stand in her way. I mean, she didn't know how to read or write. She'd been, she'd had a traumatic brain injury. And nothing held her back. She just was like, no, I'm just going to, this is what I want to do. This is what my calling is. And I don't know, to see someone like that who overcomes all of that and just focuses on what their calling is, and through all the noise, through all the hardship, just stays laser focused on that. I mean, that to me, I don't know, that's somebody that I would like to sit down with and just say, how did you do that? How did you, it's one thing for me sitting at Duke University to talk about hardships that other people are facing, but she was right in the midst of it. And yet she was still helping other people out all the time, at tremendous risk to herself. And that to me, that's fascinating to me.
Anything on your bucket list?
On my bucket list, yeah, I mean, tons of stuff. Oh man. Oh gosh. It's so hard to narrow it down. I mean, I just want to travel more.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the main thing. I mean, I learn so much anytime I go anywhere, but there's so many places that I haven't been. So I would, just traveling more and having that freedom to meet other people and learn about other people and other cultures. And yeah, that's my big thing.
Well, you're very persuasive. Anything to deal with? Would you ever think about going into politics after your time at Duke is over?
No.
No. Okay, that's a big
No.
no. Well, anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to pass along to our audience?
I mean, not particularly. I mean, I think I would just I love what you're doing here. I love this idea of,
Oh, thank you.
having conversations with people,
Mm-hmm.
and just trying to open up dialogue, trying to let, I think a lot of the people that you interview are, have roots in the Hilton community. And so, I think that's great because I think, there's times when we leave and we come back, but honestly, when I come back, I spend most of the time with my family because, my family who's there, because I don't get to see them that often. But chances to, I think this is great, a chance to kind of reconnect and think about things from the perspective of where I grew up. And I appreciate the opportunity. It's very cool.
Well, I appreciate it. I don't know if you are in the Hilton Academic Hall of Fame as well, right? 2019. I think your picture is right next to your mother. So those of you that want to go to the high school auditorium, you can see Dr. Bermeo there. Um, it's been great getting to talk to you. You've persuaded me, you've informed me on so much, and I've learned a lot in this hour long or so podcast. And I just want to go back to what your mother said when I was trying to get in touch with you because she thought you'd be a cool person to interview. And she was right. And she said, Sarah, she's a farm girl at heart and likes to fix the world. You don't meet many people like that. And your mother was dead on with that. And you keep going out there and trying to fix the world because I think you are making a big difference.
Well, thank you for that. But I guess I would say to any of the young people out there listening, it's the young people with the energy coming up that are really going to change the world. So that's the next generation is where we're looking at. But I really do appreciate both the time to do this and the compliment. That's very sweet.
You're very welcome. Well, folks, this has been Shooting the Breeze with Bermeo. We'll be back with more podcasts real soon. Good night.